Well, good evening, everybody. It's Benjamin Morgan, Chief Executive of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia, and welcome to our Tuesday 7 p.m. broadcast, a live discussion tonight to discuss the ATSB's recent decision to refuse to investigate a double fatal mid-air collision that occurred up in Gympie in Queensland. And this evening for the broadcast, we're going to be joined by AOPA Australia President Sean Kelly and also Director Clinton McKenzie to discuss the background to this decision. We've also been contacted by the ATSB in the lead up to tonight's broadcast and have been provided a statement which we will read to everybody, and then we'll go through and not only dissect that statement, but we'll examine the accident investigation legislation, and we'll be looking at the areas that we believe the government needs to make some immediate changes in order to, I guess, deliver a much safer and better outcome for the aviation industry. But before we dive into that, I'm going to welcome Sean Kelly to the broadcast, and we're going to have a quick catch up. G'day, Sean. How you going?
Good. How you going? Good to see you.
Yeah, look, extremely well. And thank you so much for making some time tonight to join us to talk to our members and industry supporters across the country. Sean, AOPA is backfiring on all 12 cylinders post-COVID, and we're slowly pulling the organisation back into shape. It's been not only an adventurous, exciting and challenging year, but it looks set to be a really big one heading into 2023.
It looks really good heading into 2023. We've got a lot of new people on the board. I'm really excited about the people that we've got on board. We've got some real top quality professionals, people that are really excited about trying to make a difference in GA for us.
And of course, not to mention those that have come to the end of their terms and have stood down at the last AGM and have made way for these new directors to come in. Some great directors there that put a huge amount of effort in, including Dr. David Hook, who did an outstanding job in helping pull together all of the accounting of the association, bring us into the 21st century in making sure that all of our reporting is right on point. He just did such a fabulous job.
Yes, he did. Really excellent. Sean Rennick was also very instrumental throughout the year in keeping us on track. So yeah, big thank you to those guys.
Well, COVID certainly presented a range of unique challenges that I don't think the association has previously ever endured. It's one that certainly left a lot of us asking questions as to how much longer it was going to go on, the lockdowns, the restrictions, and of course the overall damage it did to the aviation industry. But like all things, when you go through hardship, you come out the other side and it presents a host of new opportunity. And that's what we're focused on moving into the new year. And certainly our team, especially on the membership management front, led by Lorraine McGilvray, is working so hard at reaching out to members. And I have to say, I've been watching all the renewals coming into the system this last 2 weeks, and it's just so encouraging to see that support pouring back into the association with people saying, absolutely, you were there for us during that difficult time, and we're going to be here for you as you move forward with your advocacy. So what a great result.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are really looking forward to reconnecting with a lot of our members. A lot of our members obviously were really financially handicapped throughout COVID, and we made the decision to not lean on them to renew their memberships. We were, tried to be cognizant of the fact that times are a little bit tough. And now that we've come out the other end of it, we are seeing a tremendous influx of people renewing with us.
Well, it's going to be a huge journey next year, no doubt, lots of hard work. Well, Sean, the purpose of tonight's discussion is to dive into this decision that has been made recently by the Recreational Aviation Australia Limited to withdraw from investigating its own accidents. And this has been I think it's fair to say, it was a very controversial issue a number of years ago when we started publicly advocating in this space to say that it was, in our association's view, improper for the RAAus to be conducting its own accident investigations. And I have to say that when the announcement was released a couple of weeks ago, it was one that realistically RAAus deserved our huge thanks and appreciation. It was a decision that the association has genuinely felt is the right decision, and one that ultimately will serve recreational pilots and general aviation pilots best as we move forward.
Right. I think that the decision by RAAus to do this was exactly the right decision. I commend them for taking that step. It's obviously quite a difficult step for them to take, but I think it's the only way that they're going to be able to. It's the only way that they're going to be able to perhaps force the ATSB to to treat RAA's accidents in the same way they do VH-registered aircraft.
Okay, well, there is obviously a lot to this. It's a complex issue. I said it before in the video that I released last week. It involves a whole array of complex matters, notwithstanding also matters that have now, that we understand that the RALs are facing with respect to legal challenges, etc. We're not here tonight to discuss those issues, but we are here tonight to discuss the ATSB's response to the RALs withdrawing. And what our association believes would be the right outcome. And to help that conversation forward, I'd like to welcome Clinton McKenzie, who has recently joined the board of AOPA Australia as one of our directors. Welcome, Clinton.
Good evening, Ben, and good evening, Sean. Thanks for the invitation to talk on what I think is a very important topic, and in the light of some fairly traumatic events over the last few weeks.
Okay, well, Clinton, maybe the best place to start is I'm going to hand this over. I usually get to do all the talking in these things, but tonight I'm going to be really obscure and not talk. I'm going to hand this over so that maybe you could start by reading through the ATSB statement. I do want to stress the ATSB took it upon themselves to reach out to me this afternoon and to furnish me with a statement from the Chief Commissioner, Angus Mitchell, in relation to this particular discussion. And I believe it would be a really good foundation for us to work from this for tonight's discussion. So over to you, Clinton.
I'll read that out shortly, and I'll try not to do too much talking, although if I give the secret signal that I'm losing my voice, please step in. As soon as I read what the RALs had decided to do, and I thought it was a very well-argued decision and well-founded decision by them, and then found out that the decision by the ATSB not to investigate an accident involving 2 fatalities, I immediately, for some reason, thought of an accident investigation file that I read, and it's still there. It's in the museum in the old Met station at Forest in the middle of the aerodrome in the middle of the Nullarbor Plain. And I commend anyone who hasn't been there to go there. It's a fantastic place. And I reached out, as the cliches these days, to the current folks who are running Forest to see if they could send me a copy of that file. And I was very grateful to Wendy and Chris and Jess the dog, who got back to me quickly and sent me a photo of this accident report that arose from an incident at Forest Aerodrome in 1965. 21st of April 1965, aircraft Bravo Yankee Delta Oster J5G had an incident at Forest Aerodrome, and there was a report to the DCA, an accident report, a file was raised, an investigation happened, telegrams were sent, telephone messages. This is all going down the folios back in the good old days. They keep folios, what's all these, all of the documents in the file are. And then the last document in the file is, of course, the file closed letter from the Director General of Civil Aviation to Regional Director of DCA in Western Australia. So that was the investigation of an incident at Forest Aerodrome in 1965. And you know what triggered the incident? On landing, the aircraft did a bit of a ground loop and the tail skid was broken. No injuries, no aircraft loss, no major damage to the aircraft. But nonetheless, that triggered an accident investigation by the then DCA. Fast forward to August 22nd, 27th of August 2016, an ATSB investigation into a near collision, not an actual collision, a near collision due to a runway incursion involving a motor glider and a sports aviation aircraft, where at Gympie, Queensland. So there's an incident, a near miss or near hits, as accident investigators prefer to call them, which was investigated and reported on by the ATSB, notwithstanding that there was no injury and it involved recreational and sports aircraft. And so now we've got to the point in 2022 where the ATSB is effectively saying that they do investigations into sports aviation accidents other than in exceptional circumstances. Now, how have we devolved? I call it devolved to this point. I don't know, but I'll now read out what the ATSB has said in its statement, and perhaps dissect some of the things that have said by the ATSB. Now, I've got 3 screens running here because I like to have my security blanket of all my documents and primary materials, because I like to quote from primary materials rather than make it up. But let's start from the start. This is the statement attributed to ATSB Chief Commissioner Angus Mitchell. In accordance with long-established government policy, the ATSB is funded and directed to prioritise its resources on transport safety investigations that have the potential to deliver the greatest public benefit through systemic improvements to transport safety, and would only investigate accidents involving recreational aviation aircraft on an exception basis where a particular third-party risk is identified. Now, when I read that, and I think I've got pretty good written comprehension skills, I read that as the ATSB saying that the government has funded it and directed it not to do accident investigations involving recreational aircraft, except on an exception basis where a particular third-party risk is identified. Now, I don't believe, or my opinion is that statement is inaccurate, because where I start with government policy is a thing called the law. The surest way of understanding what government policy is to read the law, because that's the best kind of policy you've got. They enshrine it in law. And the Transport Safety Investigation Act doesn't have anything in it about this set of priorities, but there is a provision, Section 12AE, that provides for the Minister to give directions. And the Minister has given directions under that provision. So when I read the actual direction given to the ATSB under Section 12AE of the TSI Act, what it says is statement of expectations for ATSB. Under governance, and I'll only pick the eyes out of this, I'm going to focus on funding and priorities in this stuff about recreational aviation. I expect that in performing its functions, the ATSB will provide timely advice to government when the cost of necessary investigation activities are likely to exceed established ATSB budget levels, so that consideration can be given to the need for budget supplementation. And that seems to me to make sense, because ATSB doesn't have any control over how many accidents that occur. And it would be ridiculous if the government just said, well, you've only got this amount of money, and once you've run out of that, you can't do anything more. And we'll talk about later about what the difference between what ATSB wants to do on the one hand and what it's able or unable to do on the other hand due to legal and funding constraints. But when we get down to priorities, it is true that this direction under 12AE says, I expect the ATSB, in conducting its responsibility as a national transport safety investigator, will continue to focus on transport safety as the highest priority. B, give priority to transport safety investigations that have the highest risk or potential to deliver the greatest public benefit through systemic improvements to transport safety. But nowhere in this direction that is binding on ATSB, do the words recreational, sport, general aviation, or any of that appear. So I don't think it is true, if my interpretation is correct, to say that the government's policy and the government's funding is that the ATSB would only investigate accidents involving recreational aircraft, aviation aircraft, on an exception basis where a particular third-party risk is identified. Those words are nowhere in there. It goes on to say I'll talk about, because we'll get to the substance, which is this about the mid-air accident, and both aircraft are operating in non-controlled airspace. We'll talk about that as well, because that's actually getting down to the substance. But again, in terms of accuracy as the statements, the ATSB notes that self-administration arrangements for recreational aviation sector specifically provide for self-administration bodies to undertake accident investigation. Now, I've gone to Part 149 of the CASARs, and the word accident does not appear in there. The word investigate does not appear in there, and the word investigation does not appear in Part 149 of the CASARs. If we go to the MOS Part 149, the self-administrating organisations must have an audit and surveillance system that captures data on the number and kinds of accidents and incidents, but nowhere is there provision in the MOS for accident investigations to be conducted by the body itself. So even though it may be that these things have been taken on voluntarily, as the RAOs has done, just as you and I can engage in some accident investigation if we want, the rules don't require that to happen. And if our system of safety in Australia is going to be based upon these self-administering organisations doing their own accident investigations, then it may be that the ATSB should be recommending to CASA that the Part 149 of CASA and the MOS be amended to deal with accident investigations by those organisations.
I might just jump in there, Clinton. I might just jump in there on that one point, and it'll give you an opportunity to take a glass if you've got it there as well. By virtue, though, of thrusting these investigations onto these self-administering bodies, is it's creating a clear and obvious conflict of interest that carries with it some really significant legal liability for these organisations. And RAOs finally, after years, came to the reality that legal liability is extremely real. It's not a fantasy reality. It's a reality that's now the subject of a court action against the association or against the organisation. And so if you're a self-administering body and you're undertaking these accident investigations, you need to really think about what you're doing here. You're inserting yourself into a process by which you will be, in some manner, determining cause. And it may be that a manufacturer, a pilot, a family, a company, whatever, may decide to challenge that. And you do not have the same legal protection that the ATSB does when it conducts its investigation. So if I were a Part 149 organisation, or you're a sports sector organisational group and you're being pushed into Part 149, let me just say this as loudly as I can, because I was saying it for 6 years. Stop. Be very, very careful what you're being encouraged into, because it may end up being a lawsuit you can't afford that then ends up causing the entire collapse of your hard work for the past 20, 30 years. And so it is very real. And I'm quite surprised, and I've been with you for many years on this issue. I have not been able to see any evidence that supports the view that these self-administering organisations have any responsibility to conduct their own investigations on behalf of the Australian public.
No, that's right. And that's precisely why RAOs has been able to say, sorry, no more. I mean, if they're obliged to do it, then CASA would be saying, no, you're obliged to do it under Section X of Regulation X of Part 149. So it's precisely that reason that they're allowed to do it. And you're right. I mean, if I was a self-administering organisation hankering to get into investigations, I'd want CASA to replicate some of the provisions and protections from the Transport Safety Investigation Act and powers conferred on the ATSB on me. But Eve, you see, that prospect, of course, highlights the ridiculousness of it all. Are we going to have half a dozen accident investigation bodies, the ATSB, and then all these private organisations with private individuals doing investigations? And the tragedy at near Gympie Kaibong there points up where you've got what appears to be a GFA aircraft and an RAOS aircraft, and we're going to have two different investigative bodies there doing that investigation. And what if they come up with different reasons? You know, the GFA guy says, well, the rules of the air say that power gives way to gliders, so therefore it's a laid out there that the RAOS powered aircraft was in the wrong. The RAOS investigation comes up with different explanation, different eyewitnesses, and that way lies madness. But as to the substance, this worries me too. The Kaibong mid-air accident, in that accident, both aircraft were operating in non-controlled airspace. Procedures for operating in non-controlled airspace are long established. Mid-air collisions in uncontrolled airspaces are rare, and any ATSB transport safety investigation would be unlikely to yield new safety learnings for the aviation industry. Now, first of all, I note the paradox there. That is, you don't know if there are any learnings unless you know what happened. That's why back in the day, all accidents and incidents were investigated, because sometimes you found out the unexpected. You know, like my good old mate, Conrad Waddington, who analysed the data on aircraft maintenance and aircraft reliability, and counterintuitively found that more maintenance doesn't equal greater reliability. So if you don't know what happened, then it's pretty hard to make the decision that you're unlikely to learn anything new. But I'll note this: regular public transport jets full of passengers operate in Class G airspace, mixing it with sport aviation aircraft. Do we believe that if there's going to be a mid-air between if there's a mid-air between a sport aviation aircraft in the vicinity of Ballina or Mildura, that the ATSB will say, well, mid-air accidents, these non-controlled airspace procedures for operating there are long established. Mid-air collisions in uncontrolled airspace are rare. So what else is there to learn? The rules are the rules. Someone didn't comply with them. It doesn't.
Clinton, I have to say this is probably the most concerning part of the statement from Angus Mitchell, who's, for those that are just joining in, the ATSB Chief Commissioner, Angus Mitchell. Clinton's reading through a statement that was prepared by the ATSB and sent to us just prior to this broadcast. Out of all of the content of that statement, I am most concerned by the fact that they're making the statement that any ATSB transport safety investigation would be unlikely to yield new safety learnings for the aviation industry. I mean, there are so many obvious things about this particular accident that we need to know. Number one, were both aircraft using their radios? If not, why? Were both aircraft aware of each other's location? If not, why? If the aircraft knew they were in proximity to one another, that they were in such close proximity to one another, why were they there? What were they doing? There are lessons here that we need to understand as an aviation industry. Then we can speak to also the broader cultural issues that are equally as important as the safety, the causal safety factors of the pilot and the machine itself. And that is, what are the frameworks by which these pilots are trained to? What are the frameworks by which the culture of these pilots are encouraged towards? These are all critical safety learnings. And I just find it's almost incomprehensible that the ATSB have released a formal statement flippantly dismissing the accident and saying, well, we just don't feel there's anything here to learn. I mean, I just can't imagine a professional accident safety investigation organisation ever uttering those words.
Yeah, and I think the ATSB is been under regular criticism by coroners. I can just imagine coroners just thinking, well, how are lay police people to investigate these things properly and to come up with some coherent explanation for what happened? Because different states are different. Some coroners in some states just look at the cause of death, and that is often tragically quite easy. But others, like object, again, I need the the security blanket of primary materials. For example, here's I picked the Tasmanian coroner because the Tasmanian coroner was a bit cheesed off in a recent a report that involved or where it did criticise the ATSB. The coroner must, whenever appropriate, make recommendations with respect to ways of preventing further deaths and on any other matter that the coroner considers appropriate. Now, how can a coroner discharge his or her duties? This is the Tasmanian coroner. If there's no expert standing in front of them, independent, dispassionate expert saying, well, Your Honour, the rules of the air say this, the carriage of radio requirements say this, the broadcast things say this, eyewitnesses said that, to analyse. Otherwise, the coroner recommends that don't collide in aircraft, because if you keep colliding in aircraft, there'll be more deaths. And again, that's completely unhelpful, because absent some of these analyses, I think the ATSB is going to come under a bit of more flack, because state coroners get left to do these things themselves.
Well, Clinton, I mean, I don't know what more to say. It is just common sense. I mean, this is the country's independent accident investigation organisation, the ATSB. They're charged with this responsibility, and it's just incomprehensible that they've decided that a fatality is not worth investigating. This is like the local police turning up to a roadside accident involving multiple people having been killed, fatal accident, and just deciding we've got no interest in this. It just wouldn't happen. The same in the maritime world. If multiple people were killed in a boating accident, it wouldn't matter if they were killed on a jet ski or they were killed in a powerboat or a sailboat. There'd be an investigation into this. And I think that it really undermines aviation safety. It undermines aviation safety culture. It erodes the integrity of the ATSB to a huge extent when participants of the industry who look to the ATSB to produce quality independent reporting, and that we can debate that at times, but it corrodes the industry's trust and faith in these processes. And there's no good outcomes from this. And I really, I would reiterate at this point for people that are joining in, the AOPA Australia's firm position in relation to this is that the ATSB are wrong. They have a responsibility to carry out an investigation into all fatal aircraft accidents in this country, and they should not be shirking their responsibility and claiming that they don't have the financial resources. And I made a comment in the video that I kicked off this week, and I said it's really funny. The Civil Aviation Safety Authority at the moment is really working across the aviation industry to get businesses involved in this safety management systems, SMSs. It's the latest buzzword. You've got to have an SMS, and you've got to be able to demonstrate that you've got a safety culture, and you're self-correcting, and you're analysing and looking at risks and all the rest of it. And part of that SMS culture is an understanding that financial outcomes should not be dictating safety outcomes. And I think in a very simplistic form, what the ATSB are doing is they're showing that their safety culture is actually woefully deficient. There are lessons to be learned, there are improvements to be made, but they're deciding simply we don't have the dollars. And I don't believe that they don't have the dollars. I believe they've got an actionable cause to go back to the Commonwealth to say we need more funding, we need these accidents investigated. The industry needs to know where improvements can be made.
Yeah, well, it's got so far that Australia's had to notify a difference from ICAO SARPs on this issue. Now, for those, some people understand all that, but I'll walk them through that just so they understand what I'm saying. Australia is a signatory to the convention, ICAO convention it's called, in short, and it has a whole bunch of standards, recommended practices and procedures in it. Now, as the wonks on international, this particular convention will tell you, it only actually has one substantive obligation in it on Australia, and that is to notify differences from the SARPs. And it all makes sense, because you can imagine you come up with all of these international standards, recommended practices and procedures, where the assumption is everyone will implement them, and where there's a difference, that country will tell the rest of the world, here's the difference here, so that pilots flying from a different system will go there, and the whole world can understand the nuances of operating in particular places. These are published. You can get them from the Air Services website. They used to put them out on paper, but there are now so many of them. There are hundreds and hundreds of filed differences from ACAO SARPs. Now, the annex of ICAO dealing with accident investigation is Annex 13, Lucky 13 for accidents. And one of the file differences, the difference level that we've said to the world, the level that we've difference is we are less protective or partially implemented or not implemented at all on this requirement of ICAO SARPs. And the difference in Australia is Australia may not institute an investigation into domestic accidents. Now, they've got domestic in single italics, inverted commas, and I think what they mean is an Australian aircraft that's in Australia, where the aircraft concerned is on the Australian register. Decisions on whether a particular domestic accident will be investigated will depend on resources and the likely benefit to future safety, particularly in the general aviation sector. So, because of this policy, where it came from, I don't know, because I can't quite see it in the Transport Safety Investigation Act or between the lines of the direction under Section 12AE of the TSI Act. But nonetheless, we've told the world that accidents could be going on inside Australia that won't be investigated, but whether we do will depend on whether resourced and the likely benefit to future safety. And as said, it's a paradox. You don't know what the likely benefit is unless you know what happened. Are we going to stop, the ATSB is going to stop doing investigations of VFR flights into IMC? They keep happening. We know what happens, 45 seconds maximum to live, so there's nothing to learn from them. You'd think that sooner or later, someone would learn that maybe we need to make it easier and cheaper to get IFR ratings in a country like Australia, but that seems to be on nobody's radar other than fulminations about not flying visual flight rules into IMC.
Well, to speak to that particular issue, Clinton, I'm going to bring up a comment that was just posted by Paul Strike earlier. Now, Paul has posted a statement here and it says, why was the Mackay-Jodell investigation ceased? There was a mammoth amount of learning from that event. All the wrong things were done by the deceased, and people need to know there are consequences for not complying with the system that is designed to keep us safe as possible. Now, what Paul is referring to there is an amateur-built sport aircraft crashed up in Queensland, I believe. The aircraft was shown to be, if I've got the facts correct, it was unregistered, it was unmaintained, or it might have held a historical registration, but it had not been maintained. Not sure the pilot was licensed to fly it. It was a real calamity of breaches to aviation regulation. And an initial investigation was started, and then the ATSB suspended its investigation. Now, I think I even released a statement in relation to this on behalf of AOPA because, again, what we put out there was, hey, ATSB, what are you doing here? This is a very interesting accident for the ATSB to be investigating because it would highlight some really significant learnings. Like, for example, how is it that an aircraft can be flying in this country and the Civil Aviation Safety Authority has no clue that this aeroplane is flying around and it's not maintained and the pilot doesn't have a license, when this pilot had been actively flying in all these different locations? An investigation might have produced an outcome, which is CASA don't have the staff to actually be monitoring the system that they are purportedly regulating. Another lesson might be that CASA have no oversight as to what is actually going on with the system that they've created. Therefore, their own safety management of the industry is woefully deficient. Why was that investigation stopped? Why was it declared that there was nothing to learn there? It seems to me that this ability for the ATSB to pick and choose their investigations is creating gaping holes in aviation safety, and it's allowing accidents and incidents to pass through the system where there could be critical learnings, not just for pilots, not just for aircraft builders, not just for the aviation businesses, but surprise, surprise, for the regulator themselves in understanding where they are deficient and the improvements that they need to make in improving aviation safety.
Yeah, I think as with a lot of government agencies, ATSB is probably caught between a rock and a hard place of not being able to get enough funding and personnel to do all of the investigations that it's called on to do. But nonetheless, reputationally, you'd think what they would want to do is everything, so that it can't be said that they're making judgment calls and picking and choosing and be accused of overlooking things that may have potentially profound consequences for aviation safety. I mean, do we know, presumably, RAOS might redouble its efforts to do an education campaign for its members of the rules of the air. Remember, we went back in basic aeronautical knowledge and carriage of radio, all of these things. And it may be that the lessons have been learned before, but we don't actually know what happened. And as you say, what happens if there's a roaring trade of industry going out there, of people building aircraft and flying them around without them being certified by anybody? They don't have a license, they don't have a medical. Who's finding out whether that's going on? How would anyone know? I listened to a program called Counterpoint on ABC on a Monday afternoon, and the host is Amanda Vanstone. And I have no political affiliations, but I like her because she says whenever an official, she used to be a minister in, I think, the Howard government, and she used to say whenever an official would say to me, well, it's against the law, she would say, well, so what? So what? Who's securing compliance with that law? Who is making sure it's being complied with? Because we can pass laws until the cows come home, but if nobody's checking on whether they're being complied with and securing compliance with them, they're meaningless. I mean, we've had other discussions. You and I know people who are flying around without medical certificates when they're supposed to. There's these things. There was that accident investigation of a private aircraft that collided with terrain at Coffs Harbour, and apparently the guy had no medical certificate and hadn't done a BFR in 9 years or something, flying around, I think, in a Piper aircraft or something like that. So anyway,
Another point that you raised there, Clinton, which is something that just listening to you talk, I think is actually also worth noting, and that is by consequence of the industry being divided up into all these little segments, and having a community only focused over there and one focused over there and one over there, whether it be your sport, your gliding, your warbirds, what it has done by most likely an unintended consequence is it has removed the ability to fluently communicate with the industry as a whole. Everyone has their own communication going on. There is no central communication that appears to be driven and communicated. And again, these are valuable things that the ATSB could be discovering, and the ATSB could be assisting the industry by putting in their reporting that safety culture, safety communication, safety lessons need to be learned. And I fall back to that thinking that by picking and choosing and by just, some kind of, and who knows, I mean, this is the other thing. How do we even know how this process works? Who is the guy who wears the cape and holds the wand that decides what gets investigated and what doesn't get investigated? What is that process? How robust is it? Is it overseen by anybody? Does it have any level of scrutiny applied to it? I mean, all these things need to be answered. And I think that the longer we as an industry accept these kinds of things not happening, the worse it will get. So we really do need to be responding to the ATSB clearly and in a united fashion across the industry and saying, no, we don't accept your response. We don't accept your internal policy. We accept the law, and the legislation states you have an obligation to investigate, and we expect these investigations to be conducted. I guess it's an old case of we're doing our job. How about you go do yours?
Well, two things. One, if we on the statement from the ATSB, if we take it at face value, it's saying the ATSB is funded and directed to prioritise blah, 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 and would only investigate accidents involving recreational aviation aircraft on an exception basis where a particular third-party risk is identified. What we have to do is work out whether ATS believes it's been directed from the outside to do that, because I can't read that anywhere in the Minister's direction under Section 12 AE of the TSI Act, or whether it is its own invention or interpretation, because that's the answer to your question. Then, is it their own? Have they decided that this is what they're going to do, and they've of their own motion decided this, or are they labouring under the misconception that they've been directed to do it this way, or have I missed something fundamental in that direction from the Minister under Section 12 AE? And the other exquisite irony that arose from your consistent communications issue point is, of course, because we've got all these different self-administering organisations, they're all training people differently on how to communicate on the radio. And so, we know the story of the guy at an aerodrome where there's two different flying schools, one from brand X, one from brand Y, training their pilots differently on the radio procedures to be used at the same aerodrome. Now, you couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, it's just so unnecessary, and so it's just bizarre, particularly in an environment where the need for concise, accurate, and understandable communications is fundamental if you're going to talk on the radio. No human activity knows that better than aviation.
Well, there's no doubt, Clinton, that if I were to pick up the telephone to my friends within the Gliding Federation, they would say to me that they would be very interested in understanding what went wrong. I believe that they would hate to walk away from the experience feeling like their processes, their systems, their training led to an outcome where a collision was possible. Likewise, I'm sure if we spoke to those within the RAOs, they equally would not like to be apportioned with any blame to say that they are not training to an appropriate standard, or culturally within their community there is something that has led to an accident. But the only way we get to an outcome, the only way we will be able to arrive at a determination as to whether this is a cultural safety problem, whether this was a specific individual training problem, whether this was an aircraft-related problem, so on and so forth, is to have an investigation. It must start with the investigation, and then it leads from there. And of course, if we're going to continue with the ATSB simply saying, well, we don't want to learn anything in this space, we don't want to know what the outcomes are in this space, we are not going to improve aviation safety here in Australia with this very unique, and I'll make this point, Australia is probably one of the only countries in the world that has decided to privatise its aviation industry and to allow sectors of the industry to be controlled by private companies. And by virtue of the sectors being being managed and administrated by private companies, one would argue it's probably never been more important for an independent accident investigation body to examine the accidents in detail in order to understand whether this privatised sector management model is working or it is not working. And so there are a lot of us across the aviation industry, users of aviation, businesses within aviation industry, bodies and associations. We want this process to work. It needs to be robust.
And as I said, if ATSB's position on what it's going to investigate, not investigate, is going to prevail, and that's not up to us to decide. That'll be up to ATSB and the government. Then at least what should happen is CAS has got to start putting in rules about these organisations conducting investigations and powers and protections for them in doing so. Because clearly the ATSB believes that there are arrangements in place for these organisations to do investigations, but those arrangements are merely things that have grown up as a consequence of, well, apparently we're supposed to be doing these investigations, and they finally realise that they don't have to, and there are all the risks to which you alluded in doing. That's why they pulled out.
Look, I think it's fair to say, Clinton, it's a mess at the moment. That's about the simplest way we could describe it. Obviously, as I say in many of these videos, these broadcasts actually interestingly get reviewed by CASA, they get reviewed by the Department of Infrastructure. Clearly, they're being watched by the ATSB, and I would assume also Air Services. And no doubt there'll be aviation advisors to the Minister's office who review these videos. To think that they don't flies in the face of the fact that we get such clear correspondence from them in the lead up to these broadcasts. If you could be sitting in front of a panel of ATSB representatives right now on this very issue, what would you say in summary to their response and where the industry position sits on this?
Oh, well, I said first, let's do the pub test. Start with the pub test. What the pub test says, the ATSB should be investigating at least every aviation incident involving a fatality. That's the pub test. If you ask someone in the pub, who do you reckon should be investigating a mid-air collision in which 2 people died? Do you think they're going to go, oh, the local highway patrolman from the nearest? So the pub test, start with the pub test. Secondly, I'd be asking them to confirm their understanding of that first paragraph of the statement they've been made. Is my reading correct? Are they representing that they've been directed not or to only investigate accidents involving recreational aircraft on an exception basis, or is that a decision of their own? If it's a decision of their own, then maybe they might rejig that first paragraph because it doesn't read that way. If I've got it wrong, if I'm missing something in the Minister's direction under 12AE, I'll apologise. Let me know, and I'll retract and make a video so that everyone can understand that. And if this position is going to persist, then they've got to realise that there may be a whole bunch of accidents involving fatalities that will not be investigated by by anyone other than local police, and coroners are not going to be happy about that in any way, shape, or form. Okay, well, obviously, sitting above the ATSB is the Minister for Transport, which at this point in time is the Honourable Catherine King MP. She's an Australian Labor Party Minister responsible for infrastructure, transport and regional development. If you had the opportunity to sit with the Minister on this particular issue, what would be your direct advice to the Minister in relation to rectifying this? Well, again, it's trying to work out who's actually decided this so-called policy. Because as I say, the way I work out the way the world works, I look at the Transport Safety Investigation Act, look at the Minister's statement of expectations, and when I do that, I can't interpret it as having the meaning given in the first paragraph of the ATSB's statement. So the first thing is for the Minister to understand there's confusion here. Maybe I'm confused. Maybe the ATSB is confused as to maybe the ATSB believes that that's what the Minister's statement of expectation means. If it's been misinterpreted, then I think the Minister would be interested in making sure the ATSB is recalibrated on what the Minister considers the statement of expectations to mean. Because if there's confusion as between the Minister and the ATSB as to what that statement of expectations means, then that's the term for that is bad. That's not good. Okay, well, Clinton, we made a commitment. We try and keep tonight under 1 hour. We're at 49 minutes. I really do thank you for joining us for this discussion. It's one that you've been very passionate about behind the scenes. And I have to say, on behalf of all of our members nationally, it is it's just great to have you taking such an interest in this issue and applying your thinking. I agree with you. My assessment of the situation is there really is nothing that precludes
the ATSB from conducting these investigations, and maybe they are confused, and maybe this is a situation in which we need the Minister for Transport, Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Catherine King MP. We need her to make absolutely abundantly clear that all lives lost in aviation are equal, that there are safety lessons that can be learned, and that they are only possible, the learnings are only possible if we conduct solid investigations that have integrity and the trust of the industry. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really do appreciate it.
And safe flying, everyone. It's, we've all got to be very careful because it's a very unforgiving environment, as we all know. And one mistake could be our last. So let's redouble our efforts to be as safe as we possibly can.
Thank you, Clinton. Okay, well, there you heard it. Clinton McKenzie, Director of AOPA Australia, has been very clear in his communication tonight. His assessment of the Investigations Act, he believes there is clear evidence to show that the ATSB should be investigating these accidents, and that he believes the Minister's statement of expectations makes clear that should be happening. Now, we obviously will be following up with the ATSB later this week, and I'll be requesting an opportunity to meet with them, and I'll be looking forward to Clinton McKenzie joining us for that conversation if they are willing to do so. We'll also be filing a request to formally meet with the Minister for Transport on this particular issue, and we will also be following up with a range of senators who've expressed a desire to raise these issues when the Senate estimates hearings resume in 2023. We'll continue to do the great work that AOPA Australia does on these critical and important issues, because after all, we're fighting for your industry. This is the future of general aviation, recreational sport, the gliding community, the hot air balloonists, the warbird guys, helicopter pilots, the whole shooting match. We really do care about aviation. We would like to get these issues sorted so that we have a stronger aviation industry, a safer aviation industry. So on behalf of the entire board of directors, I really do thank you all for joining us this evening. It's great to have the association spooled back up and working hard again. COVID's been a very difficult time, but for all of you who have rejoined the association this past 2 weeks, has been communicating with Lorraine McGilvray and the rest of the team, I really do extend my sincere thanks and appreciation. I also would like to thank all of the commercial businesses who've come back to AOPA Australia and pledged their support, along with all of you who have made significant contributions back towards our youth engagement program to get the bus back out on the road. It is a wonderful privilege to be able to work on behalf of the aviation industry in this capacity, and it's one that's certainly not lost on me. And I do pinch myself every day that I get the chance to speak up for people across the aviation industry. It can be challenging at times, but on the whole, it's an extremely rewarding experience to be able to fight for this industry. And it's one that I thank you all for the opportunity that you allow me to continue to do so. So I say this at the end of every single video that we film on behalf of AOPA Australia. If you would like to support AOPA Australia, and I really do hope that you do, I'd love you to jump online to www.aopa.com.au/membership. $159 to become a member of the association, and you're helping putting fuel in the tanks that enable us to conduct this advocacy and to engage on behalf of you. Without this voice, without us working hard for you, there really isn't another industry association that's doing this. We're truly unique, a very special organisation, and one that's worthy of its support and protecting. So thank you so much, everybody, and I do look forward to catching up with you next time for AOPA